I wanted to talk today a little bit about ME/CFS, what it is, how it affects people. Um, I think what's so astonishing to me is that the average person walking down the street knows nothing about ME/CFS. If you ask them what myalgic encephalomyelitis was, or they'd have no idea what it is. If you had said, do you know what chronic fatigue syndrome is? They'd say, oh yeah, I have that. I'm tired all the time. Life's tough. Well, chronic fatigue syndrome and ME are a lot different from being tired all the time. It's profoundly different. And unfortunately, the CFS name has really served to trivialize the disease and turn it into a big joke, which it most certainly isn't. Um, I think a lot of people don't realize that there's actually quite a bit known about the disease. Uh, Even if you had asked, you know, the average doctor, what is CFS, they would say, well, it's something that's in your head. It's, something that's not really, not really, it's not really a real disease. There's no real tests for it, and well, all of that's not true. Research has moved quite a long way, and there are tests for it. There are ways of diagnosing it. There's ways of proving objectively that you have it. There's even ways of proving objectively how bad your disability is. And in fact, the Canadian government has put out um, a number of documents to help doctors deal with patients. So we have the ME/CFS clinical case definition produced by the Canadian government by a consensus panel of international doctors and Canadian doctors. There's the CFS and ME primer for clinical practitioners, and there's also the international consensus definition, which gives you a wealth of information about brain scans and immune dysfunction and sleep dysfunction and everything that goes along with having ME/CFS. So there's really no excuse at this point for the average GP to have no clue what they're doing with this disease, but unfortunately that's the case. I myself have been to at least 15 GPs and 6 specialists. None of them had any idea what they were doing. None of them were even aware that the clinical case definition existed. So that tells you how far we have to go in terms of raising awareness among patients, the general public, and doctors. So the history of ME/CFS is pretty interesting, actually. It all started in 1984 in Incline Village, which is this place here. And there was an outbreak. It started in the girls' basketball team and kind of spread like wildfire throughout the town. This is a map of Incline Village at Lake Tahoe. The doctor there, his name is Paul Cheney, and he became quite concerned, him and his partner Daniel Peterson, that there was a serious problem here. There was a serious outbreak, and it was something that they had never seen before. All traditional lab tests came back negative. There didn't seem to be anything obviously wrong with these people, although they were having all of these severe symptoms. And the patient count kept ratcheting up. By the time it hit 100 patients, Cheney figured that it was probably a good idea to call the CDC. Now, unbeknownst to Dr. Cheney, these sorts of outbreaks were happening really throughout the country. There you go. There's a picture of Paul Cheney. The CDC had been getting word from different parts of the country that there were similar outbreaks, and they saw that Dr. Cheney was stationed in Lake Tahoe and figured that'd be a pretty good place to start your investigation. So they swept into town. They did the routine investigations. They looked at these patients and did the routine lab tests, and everything came back normal. And they left town saying that this is simply hysteria. And really, that was the start of a disinformation campaign by the NIH. This is a picture of NIH headquarters. The NIH, of course, stands for the National Institute of Health in the U.S. And their lead researcher is this guy, Stephen Strauss. And he is the asshole that really was in charge of covering everything up, of making sure that nobody knew anything about this disease. He went on live TV and he said that, really this is really just hysteria. It's all in people's heads, and anything that we do makes them feel better, and they're just a bunch of complainers. I believe, this disinformation campaign led to stereotypes, calling the disease the yuppie flu or any number of other derogatory things. What's interesting, though, is that Cheney, while he was looking for information and help from the CDC, help from the NIH, and he really didn't receive any, at the same time of his outbreak in 1984, there was also an outbreak in this place here, Lyndonville, New York, which is close to Buffalo. And the doctor there, let's see if I can bring it up for you. The doctor there is this man, Dr. David Bell. And at that time, he had about 50 patients that were sick with this disease. And he also put in a call to the CDC. And not only did the CDC not really help, they also didn't even inform him that there had been another breakout in Lake Tahoe. And it was only when Peterson, Cheney, and Bell got together at a medical conference down the line that they even found out that there had been additional outbreaks at the same time. And of course, back then, the AIDS epidemic was flaring up, and the last thing that the CDC needed was another big public health crisis. So they covered it up. And the sad reality is that, back in 1984, there may have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 patients that were sick with this disease. And since then, it has spread. And even by the most conservative estimates, there are 1 million patients sick with this disease today in the United States, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 in Canada, in Europe, the UK as well. And by many estimates, there could be as many as 4 million patients sick in the US. And the sad reality is that only 15% of these patients are ever diagnosed. Most of these patients know they're sick, but can't get any help, can't get a diagnosis, and are simply, told by the medical community to go away, it's all in your head. And while they continue to do this, the disease continues to multiply and continues to spread, although nobody really understands the mechanism with which it does. It doesn't normally seem to be contagious in most people, and yet these outbreaks occur in clusters. So there's a lot of work to be done. One of the sad realities of chronic fatigue syndrome is that the NIH is really responsible for taking the lead in terms of funding. And if you look at a graph of funding for ME/CFS research, you look at something like HIV/AIDS, and you have almost $1 billion being spent on research, and the funding gets lower as you go down. And when you get to similar sized diseases, similar in terms of affecting the amount of people, like MS or like lupus, MS gets somewhere in the neighborhood of $116 million each year for research from the NIH alone, and it's similar for lupus, a little bit less. I think it's $103 million if I remember correctly, and then ME/CFS is $5 million. So it's absolutely ludicrous the tiny amounts of money that are being spent on this disease, especially considering that per patient capita, it has the biggest drain on the economy, because these patients don't die. They languish year after year after year, and typically they either die from heart failure, because ME/CFS affects the heart and creates some serious cardiac problems, which I don't have time to go into right now, or they just simply commit suicide because they can't handle the symptoms any longer, and I can completely understand that point of view. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore, and if you're being told that this disease is forever and that there is no cure, it can be very difficult for a lot of people. So unfortunately, those deaths are not recorded. So it's very difficult to know exactly how many people die from ME/CFS, because if you have a heart attack, you die from cardiac failure, not CFS, even though it's caused by a lack of ATP in the heart. If you die from suicide, well, you died from some sort of mental illness, right? You didn't die because you're being faced with this, crippling, unending disease. So there is a massive lack of funding. And the position of the NIH has been, if the patients want research, you have to pay for it yourself. So thankfully, there are a lot of really good organizations out there that have been pushing forward, that have been raising money, that have been doing really good research. And in fact, all of the real breakthroughs that have happened in the last 5 years, or even the last 10 years, have been patient-funded research. So if we just move forward here a little bit, here we go. So in the United States, you have the Department of Health and Human Services, which is HHS. And HHS funds the CFS committee, which stands for the CFS Action Committee, which is a group of people that get together that try to steer research and take public testimony. We also have the Solve ME/CFS initiative, which is probably the best organization out there for fundraising. They've put together the Solve CFS Biobank, which is a place where patients can get together and provide samples so that researchers can get to those samples and be able to do research in a timely manner, because one of the biggest challenges in research is finding the patients. So many people are undiagnosed. There are so few doctors out there. It's simply difficult to find these people in a timely manner so that the research can be done. Well, there's some interesting stuff going on right now. There's the rituximab study, which was originally, I believe it was Icelandic doctors, don't quote me on that, but they did the phase 1 and the phase 2 trials, and we're repeating the phase 2 trials in the UK right now with the rituximab study. Kind of interesting there. Rituximab is a drug that destroys the B cells in your immune system to sort of restore balance to your immune system. I'm not totally on board with their findings. I don't think that's the answer, but it is definitely interesting, and it definitely shows that ME/CFS is essentially a disease of immune dysfunction more than anything else. There's another study going on, sponsored by Capax Pharmaceuticals, called the Synergy trial, where they're trying to stimulate mitochondrial function with a stimulant, which is Ritalin, and a number of nutrients, which I think is an interesting approach, and I think it probably will have some benefit, but ultimately I don't think it gets at the root of the problem, because mitochondrial dysfunction is certainly a characteristic of the disease, but I don't really think that that's the answer. I think it's a stem of the immune system dysfunction. So at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to get anywhere, but it's an interesting study nevertheless. And this is probably some of the most interesting work that's been done. I actually sent a letter to the health minister, and I asked him what they were doing, what the Alberta government was doing in order to help CFS patients and in order to provide funding for research. And of course, there isn't a single doctor in Alberta that's treating ME/CFS patients, with the exception of Stein in Calgary, who has a 2-year waiting list. And there's no funding for research. And he pointed me to some wonderful work that was being done at the University of Alberta by Gordon Broderick in collaboration with Nancy Klimas, and said, look how wonderful this is. There's all this research being done at the U of A. And while that research is wonderful and groundbreaking, Gordon Broderick's dynamic modeling is absolutely fantastic stuff. It wasn't funded by the Alberta government. It wasn't funded by the University of Alberta. It was funded by patients. It was patient money that allowed the initial groundwork to be done so that further grants could be pursued, but none of which was from the Alberta government or the Canadian government. So I think it's pretty disingenuous for the Minister of Health to suggest that the Alberta government is funding research when in fact they're doing nothing. There isn't even a code in the Alberta healthcare system so that doctors can charge for their services when dealing with ME/CFS patients. So if you can't charge for your services, there won't be any doctors. It's that simple. And yet Ontario does have a code which is relatively new. It's within the last couple of years. So at least in some places of the country there is some hope, but for the most part, if you're an ME patient, you are paying for everything on your own. And with that, that probably takes me to my my GoFundMe page. A little update here. Initially, the goal was to raise $5,000 to go down to the U.S. and see Dr. Paul Cheney. He's now in North Carolina. He's no longer in Lake Tahoe. Unfortunately, we only managed to raise $650, and my thanks go out to everybody that has donated. It means a tremendous amount to me that you took the time to donate, and and that you're there, standing next to me in this battle. It is really important to me, and I hope you understand that. But there's still a lot of money to raise. I've actually changed plans, and I've started seeing a doctor in BC by the name of Greg Blaney, and he's been wonderful. He's a Canadian doctor, and he's a lot less expensive than Paul Cheney. Nevertheless, it's still $400 an hour for his time, and all of that $650 has been spent. As you may well know, my disability claim through my employer, through my private disability insurance, was denied, and we're in litigation there. CPP Disability also denied my claim, so that's in the appeals process right now. I'm fairly confident that it will be granted on appeal, but we're still at least a year away, probably 2 years away from me seeing any money, and I've been funding my all of my health care off of savings and investments that I had before I got sick, and that money is finite. So I really do appreciate any donations that friends and family make. I will probably be continuing to move forward with the GoFundMe campaign, to probably go out to the general public and try to raise money that way. A lot of people may say, this is your mother's responsibility. This is your family, your immediate family's responsibility. They should just pick up the tab for all this. And to some extent, that's probably true. But these bills can get very hefty, and I'm trying to be proactive and make sure that nobody ends up getting stuck with a $20,000 bill for any of this. She's already made a commitment to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $7,000 on immediate expenses, and she's been footing the bill for most of my living expenses. So that's why we're trying to raise money, because these bills can get really out of control down the road, and every little bit counts. If you think I'm a massive asshole and you don't really want to, contribute to my campaign, I completely understand that. You could also, if you're interested in supporting ME/CFS patients, there are a lot of good places to go. You can provide funding to the Solve CFS Biobank. One of the great places to donate would be the Solve ME/CFS initiative. You can get online and you can listen to HSS's CFSAC meetings and get clear on what's going on. There's also a great website called Phoenix Rising that provides a lot of excellent information in terms of donations and places where you can get your money to researchers. That would be super helpful. So, all that being said, there's a lot of information I'd like to go over. There's a ton of stuff I'd like to talk to you about, but unfortunately, I just don't have time to go into it all now. There's so much to talk about, and this disease and the professionals that have been handling it have been, it has been such a massive scandal, and it's almost hard to wrap your head around how badly this disease has been bungled over the years, and how vicious the government in the U.S., the CDC and the NIH, have been at discrediting it and sweeping it under the rug. Although I think that with new leadership in both of those organizations, there is hope on the horizon that we will move forward. And certainly the CDC and the NIH have at least taken notice and They're no longer actively trying to prevent progress from being made. Anyway, I thank everybody so much for listening. I make these videos because unfortunately I'm confined to my bed most of the time, and I can't get out. I can't spend time with people explaining all this stuff. I will leave you with a short trailer for a documentary video that's in production that is trying to help educate the public on CFS. It's called Canary in the Coal Mine, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening.
Less than half the doctors in this country know the name of this illness. I don't know of another illness like that.
The doctor had said to me, everything you're feeling is in your head.
Affects 1 million people in the United States.
How many people are going to have to get sick with this disease before they pay attention to it?
There is a future you take for granted every day and never articulate to yourself, and yet it's always there. And when you come down with an illness that has no end, it strips away that idea of a future.
I have this belief that if I can read a lot of science and do a lot of self-experimentation, that I can turn this thing around.